Right behind Chief Robocall.
I'm going to kick it off. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted you could join us. I'm Allison Cutler, Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. A major part of my Bureau's work is to stop unwanted robocalls. We are pleased to host today's meeting of the Robocall Strike Force to receive a report from industry on the steps it is taking to address this problem. 2 months ago, industry leaders moved to form the Robocall Strike Force in response to a call to action by Chairman Wheeler asking industry to develop within 60 days an action plan to give consumers better tools to stop unwanted robocalls. Today, the Strike Force has come together to report to the Commission on its recommendations. Robocalls and telemarketing calls are still the number one source of consumer complaints received by the FCC. However, giving consumers meaningful control over the calls and texts they receive requires collective action by the industry. While we were happy to support the work of the Strike Force by designating liaisons as a resource for each of the working groups, the final report is an industry product. This afternoon, you will hear from several speakers about the work of the Strike Force and the importance of protecting consumers from annoying and often fraudulent robocalls. First, Melissa Arnaldi, President of Technology Development for AT&T, will give a presentation on the Strike Force report. This presentation will include an overview of the Strike Force recommendations in each of the areas Chairman Wheeler asked the industry to focus, including availability of free robocall blocking and filtering technology for consumers, accelerated development and deployment of caller ID authentication standards to increase accuracy in the identification of incoming calls, and solutions to mitigate caller ID spoofing, such as creation of a do not originate list. Following Melissa's presentation, Randall Stevenson, the Chairman and CEO of AT&T, will speak. Commissioners Clyburn, Rosenworcel, Pai, and O'Reilly will then provide remarks, and Chairman Wheeler will conclude today's meeting. Thank you again for being here today. I will now turn things over to Melissa.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. I really want to first start by thanking FCC Chairman Wheeler and Chairman and CEO of AT&T, Randall Stevenson, for bringing this group of professionals and industry-wide advocates together to work a very important consumer impacting problem. It was only 2 months ago when we all met here at the FCC to officially kick this important work off. In 2 short months, this group of over 30 companies has met over 100 times. 100 times. We have made tremendous progress on short-term deliverables while also ensuring that any work not completed within the past 60 days has a clear owner and a path for completion. I will spend the next several minutes summarizing our key accomplishments and next steps required to continue the work that has been jump-started by the Strike Force. First, the Strike Force started with a list of 5 key objectives. The first one is focused on the adoption of authentication standards and is the first step in delivering a secure and trusted caller ID for consumers. Now, while the majority of spoofing begins on the new internet-based calling platforms, work is definitely required beyond the standards to ensure the new secure caller ID can work for traditional calls. This second objective addresses that in making sure that the authentication between internet-based and traditional calls in place when needed. The third objective that you'll see was for the group to evaluate the feasibility of what we call a do not originate list, which I will sometimes refer to as D&O. At the most basic level, a D&O list would include telephone numbers which should only be used to receive calls, never to make a call. We have done some great work on this topic to show how we can take away the perceived authority gained by stopping bad actors from spoofing highly recognizable numbers. Now, while the idea of a D&O or do not originate list is quite simple, the mechanics and implementation can be quite complex. The fourth objective of this group that Chairman Wheeler gave us was for this group to find unique and creative ways to stop unwanted calls from reaching consumers. There's a lot of good information available regarding bad robocalls, and we recognize the importance of sharing and using that information across the industry. And finally, we know that we all must work together to combat this problem. And while we work on robust solutions, we want consumers to know that there are already today many, many tools available to help consumers block unwanted calls. This is an important slide that I want to touch on. This is really to understand or help convey the amount of work that was completed in a very short time frame. We received the request to take action on this growing problem in late July. And AT&T quickly agreed to chair the strike force and then held the first meeting in August. And 2 short months later, we are back today to deliver our results and progress forward. Again, we accomplished a great amount of work in this short timeline, including a 47-page robocall report. And while the strike force will continue to work with standards bodies, we will ensure that the standards bodies going forward will be at the table, as they have been, but in an even more predominant position to drive this capability forward. Now, while the FCC sent letters to 9 carriers, and those are the ones highlighted in white, we invited representatives from the full industry to participate, as we recognize this is a complex problem that requires a broad set of layered solutions. You can see the various service providers, device manufacturers, operating system developers, infrastructure vendors, and more that comprise the robocalling strike force. And to alleviate external distractions, all companies were required to sign a non-publicity agreement in order to participate as official robocall strike force members. I'm going to review some of these items in more detail, but I want to be really clear about the consumer benefits that have been delivered as of today. You know, we took the advice of Chairman Wheeler to heart when he told us at the kickoff meeting to not let perfect be the enemy of good. We had to get going and go fast. So, a number of experts believe that less than 10% of consumers currently are using available call blocking solutions. So to help get this message out regarding available solutions, the FCC has agreed to host a robocalling protection website. You can find it at www.fcc.gov/unwanted:calls. This website will launch today. This site provides consumers with a one-stop, easy-to-find location where they can locate information on ways consumers can protect themselves. We have also established improved industry coordination for identifying and stopping robocalls. One of the strike force companies has recently created a report of suspected illegal robocalls, which is shared with other members, giving them a head start on the identification of suspected fraudulent calls across their network. At the same time as the Do Not Originate trial, the IRS saw a 90% reduction in consumer complaints on the IRS scam calls. 90%. Prior to the trial, in late August, there were approximately 43,000 complaints on IRS scams. They dropped significantly to only 3,700 in mid-October during the trial. Now, not all the work of the strike force has been completed. We know that. We've done a lot of work in 60 days. We have a lot of hard work to continue. But we've taken a big leap forward getting this industry of partners together, and this work will continue through the strike force, but in strong collaboration and handoff of many of these key deliverables with the industry support groups. It's important to get the industry behind us so that we can accelerate on these timelines. I'll cover more about the industry partners at the end. We will review the work of the authentication group coming up. That is working on new anti-spoofing capabilities so consumers can trust their caller ID again. We'll also talk about the Empowering Consumer Choice Group that's identified call categories such as charity, political, and others to be used in analytics to aid the consumer choice. And of course, we've recognized that important role of the consumer and how they can play in helping identify illegal robocalls. Okay, I apologize for some of the print that's small on this view here, but hopefully you can see it. But let me walk through it. It's important. So this is our first working group called Authentication. This group focused on implementation of call authentication capabilities so consumers can trust their caller ID. This group had the very important job of focusing on the authentication standards and was successful, very successful, in accelerating the standards approvals from December to October. Those authentication standards lay the groundwork of what we got to do going forward. The team also discussed various ways for authentication of internet-based calls to work with traditional landline phones, and we've identified a workable solution, which is a great accomplishment. Now that work will need to continue with the standards and industry group, including ADIS and SIP, to ensure that the inner working is deployed in the most efficient manner across the entire ecosystem. There are a few steps to complete before the authentication standards will begin to positively impact customers. Now, the team has recognized the need to develop an example timeline for implementation, and the few steps you will see listed here. First of all, we have begun early prototype testing, and we started that this year on the standards. That will give us early learnings that we need as we go into deployment and development next year. Vendor discussions have already begun, and vendor software deployment will begin in the first quarter of 2017. In order for authentication processes to work effectively, they will need to be deployed and tested across a large part of the industry. This is not a quick and easy task, but some companies are working to accelerate deployments and lead as early adopters. We must complete this work. And from a long-term perspective, this important work will continue in collaboration with industry groups such as ADIS, the Alliance for Telecommunications and Industry Solution, along with the SIP Forum, and these groups are already involved in the authentication standards bodies. This is what they do today. So in the first quarter, they will develop metrics and make them available to carriers and others to ensure that our development progress moves forward. We will also continue with the industry approval of the certificate framework required for authentication in the first quarter of 2017. And the testing that began with the few Strike Force members will be migrated to the ADIS testbed, where more industry partners will join to be able to advance our testing efforts. Our next working group, our Empowering Consumer Choice working group. This focused on ways to give consumers more control over robocalls. This involves two broad areas. First, working on consumer outreach to ensure Americans understand existing call control mechanisms. Second, working to produce the next generation of call control mechanics. On the first point, the working group has recognized that most customers may not be aware of the call control mechanisms available today. So just as I said previously, the FCC has agreed to host a website where consumers can get the best information available on existing call controls. Again, the website is fcc.gov/unwanted calls. This will allow consumers to keep up to date on the work of the Strike Force, as well as in collaboration with the industry groups to deliver new types of call control mechanisms. What's important is we have industry support groups, including ACT, the Application Association, CTIA, NCTA, U.S. Telecom, and Strike Force participants that will continue to provide content, updated content, to this FCC site. The group also performed the technical work needed to begin delivering more useful call information for future call control mechanisms. For call control mechanisms to work better, they need access to new information from the network. For example, call categories such as telemarketing, political, charities, and many, many more. So let's look at the long-term actions here. We will continue to ensure, from an industry work group perspective, that we provide additional information to the FCC to keep the robocall portal up to date. We are going to work with standards committees on call categories and information flows to ensure that we get those developed and implemented. The results of this standards work will empower the industry to innovate further on new call handling options. And believe it or not, some industry members are already releasing new tools now and will do so ongoing forward. In addition, the working group recognized that for wireless customers, third-party apps play a central and vital role in controlling unwanted robocalls. The App Association, or ACT, has agreed to create a new program with the community of app makers to drive new and more powerful apps. Now, we want to make sure we don't dictate user interfaces or limit innovation in any way. But improving these information flows will empower the full diversity of approaches that we expect and need. Okay, the last group I talked to you about really did focus on the consumer. This group has focused solely on how we identify and ultimately seek out the illegal robocalling campaigns and shut them down. The purpose of the DNO, or the Do Not Originate solution I mentioned at the beginning, is to make sure that certain telephone numbers are not able to make outbound calls if requested by the owner of the number. This can be a very useful tool against bad actors who spoof recognizable numbers, such as IRS 800 numbers, in an attempt to gain credibility for their fraudulent activity. This working group received a written request from the IRS to block a small list of numbers. Right after the first few carriers started blocking the numbers on the DNO list, early indicators showed significant reduction in completed calls from those spoof numbers. As more carriers joined the trial, the spoofing attempts dropped to single digits. So now, again, like I said, while the idea of a do not originate list is quite simple, the mechanics of implementation can be complex, and we're still working on those. A full report of the DNO trial is expected to complete in the first quarter of 2017 with the readout to the strike force and the FCC by U.S. Telecom. One of the first steps in identifying illegal robocalls is to define a set of profiles for identifying those bad actors. I'm proud to say that the group has done that. The group is committed to sharing much more information than they had in the past across carriers and across the ecosystem to expedite shutting down the bad actors. In fact, one of the strike force members has developed a report to identify suspected fraudulent calls and has begun sharing daily the information with the network owner of each number for their continued investigation and mitigation action. This group worked with the regulatory group to get clarification from the FCC regarding robocall mitigation. This clarification provided the necessary legal footing for members to take increased action against illegal robocallers. Some strike force members also shared their internal practices for robocall mitigation, which will strengthen the U.S. Telecom Industry Traceback Group efforts, where this work will continue. Regarding long-term plans, the continued work on Traceback and DNO has been worked in collaboration with U.S. Telecom's Industry Traceback Group. The DNO trial is ongoing, and as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Telecom Group will report back in the first quarter of 2017 with conclusions and recommendations. There is a lot of interest from members of the strike force to get more engaged in the Industry Traceback Group, and U.S. Telecom is planning on doubling the number of participating companies from 11 to 22. To help grow this group, U.S. Telecom is opening up membership to the Industry Traceback Group to non-U.S. Telecom members. As the Industry Traceback Group expands, tracebacks are expected to take less time. This is critically important for identifying the bad actors. While the three previous working groups focused on technical actions, the first one starting with authentication, which essentially will help us identify spoofing actors. The second one, I talked about the consumer actions that we need to help consumers address how they receive calls today and what actions they can take. The third one talked about traceback and how we can capture the robocallers until we get authentication in place. This one really focuses on technical solutions that as an industry, what we need to continue to move forward. So in order to encourage full industry cooperation, it's important to clarify that industry participants can and should share information necessary to trace back and stop illegal robocalls at the source. This group provided guidance to the technical working groups on definitions of robocalls and that different calls should be subject or could be subject to different mitigation measures. This was great partnership with the FCC in helping us define these regulations. For example, a blocking tool that a consumer opts into may block any unwanted call, whereas other measures such as traceback and shutting down suspicious operations need to focus on traffic that's illegal. This group, working with the FCC, also proposed safe harbors for cooperating identities. And what I mean by that, for example, is if a service provider inadvertently blocks a legitimate call while trying to stop the illegal calls from reaching consumers, it should not be subject to enforcement action if it exercises due diligence to verify that the calls are indeed illegal. The last short-term item listed is a great example of identifying and removing regulatory roadblocks. As a traceback working group was developing the plan for a do not originate trial, there was concern that there was no clear authority to block calls in this situation. The FCC acted quickly to issue a clarification that identities may indeed block calls when instructed by the subscriber of a spoofed number. This group also met with the FCC, the FTC, and a representative of state attorney generals. One of the issues raised was that the subpoena process for sharing information between carriers was inefficient. The group agreed to find a way to maintain a list of company contacts who are familiar with this process. Addus has agreed to maintain this list, which is expected to speed the issuance of subpoena requests for traceback efforts. And while several regulatory roadblocks were identified and resolved during the strike force, this work will continue in collaboration with U.S. Telecom. As, by the way, many of the strike force members are either members of U.S. Telecom or of the U.S. Telecom Industry Traceback Group. So of all the important work done to date, perhaps the most important will be our continued efforts. And I wanted to make sure that I could point out the partnership and collaboration that the strike force group will have over the next several months with these industry groups. Many of the strike force members are already members of the organizations listed here. We want to specifically recognize the following individuals for their support. First, Susan Miller from Addus and Richard Shockey from IETF. They will continue to help with the authentication, signaling, and certificate government work, which will lay the groundwork for secure and trusted caller ID. Their leadership is critical, and they will be in the driver's seat with us. The long-term deliverables associated with device call functionality will be handled for wireless by John Morano from CTIA and for wireline by Kevin Rupy from U.S. Telecom. This work from both groups will help drive solutions that ultimately will help consumers make an informed decision before answering an unknown call. Susan Miller from Addus is also helping to define options by which customers may easily report unwanted calls for investigation. And again, Kevin Rupy from U.S. Telecom will be taking the output from the Traceback work group and incorporating it into existing industry Traceback group. As the Traceback group becomes more efficient, the lifespan of individual illegal robocalling campaigns will decrease. With the continued support of these organizations and their members, we feel confident that the great work of the Robocall Strike Force will continue to deliver benefits. So before we wrap up, though, I want to thank the FCC for their great collaboration and continued support throughout this process. I also want to thank subject matter experts from over 40 companies outside of the strike force who made themselves available for the working groups. The strike force would not have been possible without the commitment and hard work of the industry partners, including the individuals who took on the added task of being working group co-chairs on top of their already demanding jobs. As I've stated before, the great work of this group will continue in partnership and collaboration with the industry standards. Now, before I hand this off, though, to Randall Stevenson, Chairman and CEO of AT&T, I want to make sure that the FCC knows that AT&T is committed to continuing our work with vendors to be ready for verification of authentication capabilities by fourth quarter of next year. These standards will make it easier to mitigate robocalls and go after the bad actors. And AT&T intends to execute on this aggressive timeline. I will now hand the meeting back over to Randall.
Thank you, Melissa. To both you and Allison, just thank you for your leadership in this. You've done a really great job of assembling what I'd call a blue ribbon panel here of people to help address this, and come a long way in 60 days. We got a long way to go. Fully recognize that, Mr. Chairman, but progress made so far has been really, really good. This blue ribbon panel, it's 30 companies, and it comes from the OS developers, device manufacturers, network operators. This is a broad and wide group, and it's an impressive group, but it's also indicative that there's no one part of this ecosystem that's going to fix this, and so it's going to take everybody's cumulative effort to do this. And so thank all of you for the effort that you put into this. I know this has been a time burner, and but I think it's really, really important. The chairman, when he asked us to take this project on, he said this is the number one source of consumer complaints that they receive. So we got it. We think it's important as well. It's like my number one complaint as well. And I appreciate everybody's effort. I think we also ought to take a moment and thank federal law enforcement agencies as well as the National Association of Attorneys General. They've done a lot of really good work quickly identifying illegal robocallers and helping shut them down. I'm not getting those IRS calls anymore. I shouldn't have said that. I'll probably be getting them now, but I'll be targeted. But again, these steps are just the beginning. But as Melissa told you, they're having some really significant impact in a very short period of time, and still have a lot of work to do. To that end, our members are working with the standards body. You heard Melissa talk about that. I won't be repetitive. Each of the strike force members has committed to provide the resources that we're going to need to continue making progress in this area. And then we have some other sticky issues that we'll be addressing as we go forward on how we sustain this momentum and keep it moving. So Chairman Wheeler and all the commissioners, I appreciate your challenge to taking this issue on, and it really, your challenge served as a kind of a catalyst to help get this group together. And so we're grateful that you did that, and I am really confident we're going to be able to continue making progress here. And so, Chairman, with that.
Great. Thank you. Randall, thank you for your leadership, and Melissa for being on the front line driving this. We're privileged to have the commission with us today, and so let me just move down the dais like we do at a commission meeting, and Commissioner Clyburn, share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stevenson. Just over 60 years ago, as you know, at the peak of the August vacation season, I wanted to point that out, we came together in this very room and made a joint pledge to the American people that we would crack down on those annoying robocalls and bring relief to millions across this great nation. In the weeks that followed, one press headline described our efforts as, and I quote, an elite robocall strike force being formed to protect you from scams. Now, is this a signal that the FCC has finally met the world of Star Wars? Mr. Chairman, I sure do hope so, and I hope so for good reason. In September, Americans received 2.61 billion robocalls, and guess which city topped the list for the most robocalls received? I didn't hear anything, Mr. Chairman. So I'll tell you, it's not Moncks Corner. According to the UMail Robocall Index, and yes, there's a robocall index, that distinction went to Atlanta, Georgia, my neighbors, with 115.7 million robocalls. In my home area code 843, 19.4 million robocalls were received just last month, and that equates to approximately 14.3 calls per person. So I say kudos to the more than 30 companies who participated in the robocall strike force, and I am proud to report that the working groups have not been idle, as you have heard. They have met at least twice a week for the past 2 months, and the short and long-term deliverables that were presented today are a testament to this. On the surface, the challenge seems very simple. Unwanted robocalls, which appear to be originating from a known number, are made to consumers, but they want them to stop. Now, we can talk about authentication, signaling, certificate governance, and other technical frustrations, but that is not my focus today, nor is that the chief concern voiced by millions of consumers who receive these calls each and every day. They just want easily implemented, workable solutions to end this practice, and by joining forces, we are on the cusp of achieving this. During my Connecting Communities tour, which wrapped up last week, which is why I looked a little bit more relaxed today, the issue of robocalls regularly arose, even when it was not the topic of that scheduled visit. So thankfully, there are companies like Hiya, a startup I visited in Seattle. They are implementing empowering consumers with the tools needed to block these unwanted calls. And today, we are applauding those of you who have stepped up to the plate with solutions. Coupled with the recommendations of the strike force, the potential to stop millions of robocalls that disrupt far too many family dinners and my downtime is within reach. So again, I want to thank the strike force members, the FCC staff liaisons, and the co-chairs of the 4 strike force working groups for responding to our call to action and turning around in a very short window of time a plan that promises to deliver real relief for American consumers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Roseworth?
Thank you. So picture this. Small town, western Connecticut. It's quaint and it's quiet. It's where Catherine Larson perks up every time the phone rings. Her son is serving in the Navy in a war zone many time zones away. He's a member of the submarine service and spends months at a time underwater in perilous seas on the opposite side of the world. She doesn't know exactly where her son is deployed, when he will be able to call, or what number he will be calling from. So she jumps to answer every phone call, hoping for the chance to speak with him, and fearing what news a single call can bring. I met Catherine last year with Senator Blumenthal in Hartford. She described why calls are so important to her household and so many others like hers, with family members who wear the uniform. She relayed how every call could be the call, but how too many are just robocalls. So night after night, she answers the phone only to hear from scam artists who are offering her things she did not ask for, does not want, and does not need. But shutting off her line, changing her number, that's just not an option for people like her who have family members on active duty. That's brutal. We talk a lot about the inconvenience, the hassle, the annoyance of robocalls. We talk a lot about the economic cost. But as Catherine's story makes clear, there's a human cost too. So 2 months ago, the chairman called on industry to fix the growing mess we have with robocalls. And the companies in this room and around the table, you answered the call. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your report. And thank you for what you've done to date, accelerating standards, testing do not originate technology, and educating consumers. But let's be honest. It's not enough. It's not enough for military families waiting for calls from their loved ones. It's not enough for elderly folks who are targeted by fraudsters. It's not enough for young families with 2 parents, with 2 jobs, and too little time in the day, just trying to sit down to a quiet dinner. Count my household among them. And it's not enough for every one of us who thinks we have signed up for the do not call list and think it's just another one of those government programs that is not working. Count me among them too. So, no mission accomplished until the calls stop. And on that score, I believe everyone in this room still has work to do. So if you were a member of the chairman's task force, double down on your efforts. If you help develop the list of long-term deliverables, commit now to making them happen. Work harder, faster, better. And if you need to break things to get this done, just ask. We will help you. So, today, let me offer my appreciation, but I'm going to be stingy and hold the applause. I don't think the chairman's strike force has yet fully met the mark, and I don't believe in prizes for participation. But I do think that there are rewards for all of us, for everyone, and military families included, if we keep at it, keep working, and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There have been a number of speakers already, so I just want to take 1 minute to make a few points. To start, I join in thanking all the industry participants on the task force, especially the initiator and organizer, AT&T, and I apologize for missing the last meeting at the Commission for many different reasons. The work already completed by the task force and that which is expected in the coming months highlights how difficult and multifaceted a problem this really is. At best, it's one we hope to manage and mitigate and probably can never expect to eliminate in full. While voluntary call blocking technology may help reduce some unwanted calls, there must be recognition that criminal elements, often residing outside of our bounds, will never comply with Commission rules. They should be our true target, not legitimate companies using automated dialing technologies to offer legitimate services to consumers that want them. Accordingly, the only real and sustainable solution requires thoughtfulness, cooperation, collaboration with our nation's technology leaders and businesses, not government mandates, artificial deadlines, hyperbole, or bluster. I look forward to continued work in this area, and I thank everyone for their indulgence.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm batting cleanup here today, and I want to echo what everybody has said about the contributions that you all have made individually. Whoops, I see Commissioner Pai arriving right now, so we'll just pause.
That's right in time production, isn't it?
You know, this is JIT right here. Okay, Commissioner, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for being unfashionably late.
Catch your breath.
No, I think I can manage it if you don't mind. Well, thanks for having us. I apologize for being somewhat tardy, but nonetheless, I do want to express my appreciation for all the work that the task force has done under Randall's leadership. It goes without saying, and I'm sure my colleagues have said it already, that Americans are suffering a scourge of these robocalls. Each and every year, robocalls are the number one complaint that the FCC gets. And the FTC expects us to receive over 5 million robocall complaints this year alone. And it's no wonder. I had the pleasure a few weeks ago of meeting with a company, an innovative company called Hiya up in Seattle. And one of the things they showed me was that Americans have received 984 million robocalls on their cell phones in September alone. So that's 4.5 robocalls for each mobile phone in the United States. And that's why I think it's so important for this industry, including those participating in the robocall strike force, to do this job. And thanks to the work that you've done, I think that things might get a little bit better. Take, for example, the problem of the illegitimate caller ID spoofing that has plagued us. As I said at the launch of this strike force a few months ago, spoofing is if not the, critical input into robocalling. Scammers and spammers use spoofing to disguise their identity, to trick consumers into answering unwanted calls, and to hide from authorities. The Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions, the Session Initiation Protocol Forum, and the Internet Engineer Task Force's Secure Telephone Identity Revisited Working Group have been developing the shaken and stir standards, as you know, to combat spoofing. James Bond could only be so proud. Now that work has been on hyperdrive recently thanks to the Strike Force's Authentication Work Group. And I want to specifically recognize the co-chairs of that group, Chris Wendt of Comcast and Martin Dawley of AT&T, for their tireless efforts to get this done and to get it done right now. I hope the industry will carry your gusto into implementing the shaken and stir standards, which will help eliminate spoofing. Another problem facing consumers is, a telecom company that wants to provide call blocking services to their customers but simply can't. Back in August, I pushed for the Commission to carve out a safe harbor for these companies so that they could experiment with new call blocking solutions. The Strike Force's regulatory support root cause removal work group took up the challenge and got our Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau to create a safe harbor to block calls when a subscriber instructs them to block the spoofed number. Now, with that one small change, the Detection Assessment, Traceback, and Mitigation Work Group was able to conduct a do not originate trial with the IRS, reducing complaints about IRS scam calls by about 90% in the third quarter of 2016. Now, these are real results, and I think that every participant in this strike force should be proud of what's already been accomplished. Now, it goes also without saying that there's much, much more to do, and that more to do includes not just industry, all of you in this room, but us here at the FCC. And so, for instance, I have said that the FCC must move forward with designating a governance authority and a telephone authority administrator so the certification process envisioned by the Shaken and Stir frameworks can get underway. I think the FCC must expand the safe harbor for call blocking, at least to cover unassigned numbers and illegal robocalls, so that carriers aren't threatened with liability if they do the right thing by their consumers. The FCC must make it easier for consumers to tell us about the robocalls that they receive and start taking aggressive action against unscrupulous telemarketers and known robocallers. And finally, I think the FCC should grant the petition of 51 different consumer advocacy organizations to overturn the FCC-created loophole for federal contractors in our robocalling rules. So in sum, I think working together, the FCC, industry, and consumers can once and all end what Senator Hollings once aptly called the scourge of civilization. I think the strike force and the work product that you've put out today puts us on the road toward doing that, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in the time to come. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Once again, proving timing is everything. As I was saying, thanks to all of you for what you have done, and we are painfully aware of the fact that you have day jobs. Yet, as Melissa reported, over 100 meetings over a 60-day period is very impressive, and we're grateful for the effort that this manifests, that this represents. Particularly, I want to thank Randall and Melissa for your leadership in this. As I read in the press, you haven't stopped your day job, it seems, Randall. And to thank the Allison and the team here at the Commission for the support that they have been. When we began this, I asked that we set some goals that would deliver positive and measurable results. You have delivered on some of those goals, but there is significantly more work to be done. We're not yet where we want to be. So, since I'm batting cleanup, I thought what I might do is to go through and to recap the goals that I laid out in August, to focus on the progress that has been made and not to repeat what Melissa has already told us, and to focus on, identify some of the work that needs to be done. In the July letter that I sent to the carriers, I asked for two key things. One, to offer robust and free call blocking and filtering solutions for consumers, and to facilitate blocking and filtering by downstream providers. The work that this group has done thus far has created a framework for sharing information between the network and device, has resulted in the FCC website, which, by the way, is now live, a one-stop shop for helping consumers understand how to go about blocking unwanted callers, and a commitment to enable downstream provider blocking. But we've not reached the goal. We need solutions now. The standards process, we understand, and we understand how the standards process works, but it needs to get the job done soon. And I should note that one thing that we haven't discussed here today is that the report calls for cost recovery for these efforts. Now, let me be the first to say that the FCC will look to see how we can help reduce costs. But stopping unwanted calls is as much a business expense as marketing and billing. And providing a quality service is a cost of doing business. The second goal that we identified was to accelerate technology to improve caller ID and blocking authentication, to implement verification of incoming VoIP calls, and to ensure that caller ID info was not altered or removed. The strike force has delivered again on some of these. We recognize that it is non-trivial that you accelerated the standards process by 2 months, and that you have laid out rollout milestones. So great kudos and thanks for the standards effort. But there will be no consumer impact until those standards are implemented. It's terrific, Randall and Melissa, that you today have committed to exceeding those implementation targets. We need to ask everyone at this table who is in a position to make a commitment like that to indeed make that commitment. And I will be asking for that commitment specifically to the leaders of the companies. Thirdly, third goal. In July, we asked for the creation of a do not originate list of numbers associated with fraudulent calls. And as Melissa has pointed out, here's an area where we worked together and the strike force delivered. We issued a public notice clarifying that carriers may block at the request of the consumer, and that paved the way for the trial using commonly spoofed numbers such as the IRS number. There is greater participation in traceback activities, however, that is necessary to stopping the calls. The trial worked. It is now time to expand that trial, to get it off of trial status, to make it the real deal, to expand the number of numbers, and to expand the number of carriers. There is no reason why that can't start happening today. And again, I will be asking for commitments and timelines from those companies who are in a position to do that, to start this immediately. So what's next? I guess I go to the what's next slide. What's next? Randall and I have a good friend who taught me that a job well planned is a job half done. Well, we've started the planning. For 60 days, we've been laying the groundwork. We must be aggressive in achieving the objectives outlined in the report. And that includes managing the activities assigned to the standards bodies and trade associations. In this excellent report that Melissa, the summary that Melissa gave us today, I would quibble only with two words. And that was what was described as the, quote, handoff plan, unquote, where assignments are given to trade associations and standards bodies. There is no handoff. This is not out of sight, out of mind. These organizations work for the people in this room. And it is the people in this room who must continue the responsibility of making sure that the kind of plan that has been laid out is in fact delivered upon. So let's look quickly at what consumers can count on immediately as a result of your work. Well, as I said, the new FCC website is up. There's a solutions pathway of comprehensive resources to stop calls. The expansion of the Do Not Originate list throughout the industry based on your trial has to happen immediately. And that new app-based blocking tools, especially for wireless, are now available. But the plan that has been laid out here is a plan that manifests itself over the next 20 months. Full implementation of caller ID authentication to block bad guys in the network. Traceback implementation to follow bad guys to where they live. And the improvement in consumer-based wireline call blocking are all things that have been identified, a schedule set for, but it is something that is going to be manifesting itself not immediately, but over the coming months. So as I said at the outset, we're off to a good start, but we haven't yet met our goals. In order to keep us all focused on our goals, Randall and I have agreed that we will call this group back together in 6 months so that we can look at exactly what has happened. Are we on the timetable? Are we achieving the deliverables that that this group has laid out? Again, I want to thank you all for your hard work and for the important process you have started, and to emphasize that aspect. Now we have to manage that start to a deliverable. We will be asking for timelines and timeframes from those who are able to do this in their corporate environment, and we'll be asking you all in 6 months to give us an accounting of exactly what has happened to bring your hard work to reality so that consumers have something that is actually happening, not something that is being talked about. So thank you, Randall. Thank you, Melissa, Allison, my colleagues. This is a good first step, and we look forward to seeing the results next time we get back together. Thank you.
Good to see you.